What up, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about the best value camera for under $1,000. The pros, the cons, the workarounds you need to know, and is it right for you? Let's get into it. All right, guys, so as I continue to put out content and grow this channel, the question I get all the time is, Dom, what is the best camera I can get for under $1,000? And I've mulled that question over a lot and really looked at a lot of options. And today I want to answer that question. In my opinion, it is the Canon EOS RP, one of the most underrated cameras, in my opinion, on the market today. I think it was underrated when it came out, and it's still underrated right now. Let's get into the reasons why. First of all, as I get into the review for this camera and why I recommend it today, I want to talk about technology as a whole and where the camera market is going. I'm going to keep this brief, so bear with me. As technology continues to advance in the camera market, we're seeing not huge advancements like we did when digital cameras first came out. When they first came out and the transition came over from film, we were seeing huge technological advances, especially when it came to switching over to the mirrorless systems. And now that's starting to slowly taper off. That's really great news for you, because camera like this EOS RP, they're yet a couple generations old, but they're still filled with fantastic high-end tech that even just 5 years ago would cost $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, and were unimaginable when it came to film cameras. All that to say is, yes, tech is still advancing exponentially, but we're not seeing as big of a gaps, and cameras that are just 2 or 3 generations old are still fantastic tools that should be explored as great values. Cue in the Canon EOS RP. Now, this camera was underrated when it came out. Yes, there are some flaws. I'm going to get into those and reasons why a lot of people didn't recommend it. But I think it was underrated because of the Canon EOS R. And yes, the Canon EOS R is a fantastic camera, but I think it was so overhyped because it was Canon's first real good jump into the mirrorless system. And it really just threw the Canon EOS RP into the dust. It just didn't really hit the ground running very well. It kind of got poor reviews when it came out. So let's get into the pros and cons of the RP. First of all, I bought this camera about a month ago with my own money. So this is not a sponsored video. I have no bias to Canon. In fact, I'm kind of a Sony fanboy if you didn't know. So if anything, I'm going to be harder on this camera than I would normally be. The ergonomics are fantastic. Even in 2021, when I compare it to the highest end Sony cameras that I'm using, this feels better. It feels better in my hand overall, as does the user interface. It's just a joy to use. The menu systems, going into changing features, accessing features, quickly changing things. All of it was just better on this RP than any of the Sony cameras that I own. And even some of the high-end like Fuji cameras and Panasonics that I'm using, the RP is just a really easy, joy to use camera. That being said, that is subjective, of course. It fits my hand really nicely. The grip, in fact, was something I really like. Canon knows how to produce a good grip. Even looking at the Sony A7 III, what am I holding? A7 III, the grip is a little bit short. So my little pinky tends to hang off the bottom of it. And so I tend to grip it with 2 fingers and then my pinky's on the bottom supporting, and then of course my fingers on the top with the shutter. But with the Canon, I can fit a full 3 fingers or 4 fingers if I'm holding it like this on the grip, and it just feels really nice. I love the feel of the camera. Also, when this camera came out, it was the smallest, lightest camera, full frame camera on the market, and it still feels really small and real light to me. Now, in terms of tactical layout of buttons and dials, let's get into that a little bit because it's interesting. First of all, the one thing I would change, a small picky thing, is the shutter button is below the front dial, where typically on most cameras, especially higher end cameras, the dial is on the front and the shutter is on the top here. And that kind of annoyed me. I wish those things were switched. I found myself fiddling and trying to find that dial a little bit. But once I got used to it, it was pretty comfortable. My biggest complaint though is the lack of a joystick on the back. The joystick on the back is something that, I've really become accustomed to using, and quickly and easily changing my focus points is really nice with a joystick. It's not so nice when I have to go into the touchscreen to do that. And that's what you're forced to do on the Canon EOS RP. In fact, I was finding myself having to go into the touchscreen and using the touchscreen a lot throughout the whole experience. A great example, and I could be wrong here, but when I was using real-time tracking autofocus and doing eye detect and face detect detect autofocus in tracking, I had to use the touchscreen on the back. So I had to use live view on the back and touchscreen to lock on to a specific point. So if I found a person surfing, I would have to touch the screen, and I couldn't do that in the viewfinder with the shutter. I could be wrong, maybe I'm missing something, but that's what I found. I found it kind of annoying and also just kind of interesting, because if I'm shooting action, I'm usually in the EVF and I'm not wanting to use the back screen. That being said, I really love the EVF and I love the touchscreen implementation. It's significantly better than anything on Sony. Again, you can use a touchscreen to pinch to zoom, swipe through photos, examine things. You can go into menus and swipe up and down and use a touchscreen for that. The touchscreen overall is fast, it's accurate, and I didn't find any inaccuracies that really annoyed me. So I liked using the touchscreen. I probably am just not used to doing it because it's so bad in the Sony system. One little thing that I found that I absolutely loved, now I'm gonna be spoiled with it and I want it in every camera I ever use. I think it's called an accelerometer, where it can tell if the camera is in portrait or landscape. And what I found in this camera is when I'm flipping the camera to portrait, when I'm in the EVF, all of my information also switched to portrait. When it doesn't, I haven't seen that in any other camera so far. In all the other EVFs, when I switch to portrait, all your camera settings are still going, landscape. So you kind of have to tilt and read them sideways. But in this, when I switch it up and down, it is just a joy to use. All right, now let's talk about ports. And it is a really nice port lineup. I especially like the USB-C that it has. And you can charge through USB-C, which I really liked because the battery life is subpar. It's rated at about 250 shots. And I found myself getting a little bit less than that. Now that might be because I bought this camera used, so the battery might be worn a little bit. But rated at 250. So I did like that you can use a power bank or, my computer charger to plug this in and charge it on the go. I did like that. That being said, it does have a mic jack and a headphone jack, which is great. Really essential tools, especially when you're digging into video. But my big gripe is that they interfere with the rotation of the screen. It's a huge pain for me and actually just a pet peeve. I can't stand it because if I'm shooting something like this, flip the screen around and want to shoot something like, shooting myself for vlog settings, I gotta unplug the headphones, I gotta unplug the mic, I gotta flip the screen on, then plug it back in. I found myself doing it a lot when shooting video and it just really, really annoyed me. Aside from that, overall, physically speaking, the polycarbonate layout of this camera, it's the same as like an EOS R50 or the Rebel, but it's actually strong and it feels nice to me, as do the metal dials. That's something you don't see on lower end cameras, and I really like the way they feel, the way they hold up, and even in this used unit, they just feel accurate and clicky, not like they're slushing at all. Of course, it doesn't have weather sealing or in-body image stabilization, two things that I would have liked to have seen, but those are cost saving points, so I'm not gonna gripe on them because it really keeps the cost down, which is its biggest selling point overall, is value. Opening up this body, taking a look at the sensor, it is a 26 megapixel full frame CMOS sensor. And overall, I really like the sensor. It's very, very similar, not identical to the Canon 6D Mark II. So if you do have that camera, I wouldn't say jump over to this because it's essentially the same. This one's just redesigned for the mirrorless setup. That being said, the sensor is reliable and puts out really, really beautiful images. I really like the output in RAW, as I do in JPEG, especially if you're a JPEG shooter. This is a really fantastic option for you. But in the RAW files, I did find that this camera, it has really good colors, good low light performance, high ISO, was actually quite good for what I was expecting from a camera of this price point. Now, I did see some issues with dynamic range. Not a lot of issues, but I did see that if I underexpose an image or I did have mixed lighting and I need to push the shadows in post, I saw a lot of grain, a lot of noise, and a lot of softness in those shadows. So it did struggle there. Not comparable at all to some of the Sony full frame cameras. Those cameras really kind of blow it away when it comes to dynamic range. But I did find myself just slightly overexposing and not having a ton of issues. Definitely not a deal breaker at all, especially if you know going into it and you know the workarounds to get around that. When this camera came out, dual pixel autofocus obviously was fast, accurate, and one of the highest end on the market. Same thing goes with the dual pixel autofocus in this camera. And in fact, this camera was the first camera that Canon offered with real-time eye tracking and pupil tracking autofocus in continuous focus, not just single focus like it had before. And it is fast and accurate, although I do have a couple complaints. I found it to be slow. The burst mode when shooting real-time eye tracking, when you're shooting burst, so any type of action, you'd only get 2 to 3 shots and the lag is really bad and it's slow. But you know, this camera is not something I would buy for fast action. So if I'm shooting sports or really fast moving subjects, this isn't the camera that you're gonna wanna be using. Instead, you're gonna wanna use this for portraits or headshot photography or family photography or weddings. That's something this camera can do really well. Slow moving walking subjects, normal human beings just in normal movements, it can track their eye in continuous real-time autofocus and uses that dual pixel autofocus to get fast, accurate results. Actually had a really high hit rate and I was pleasantly surprised because with a camera with an older processor and older software and at this price point, I wasn't expecting it to be as good in autofocus and as fast and accurate as it really is. As you can see for photography, I'm kind of gushing about it. For the price point, it blows away everything else on the market. I got this thing for around 800 bucks used. And really it's top of the line for photography. Now that being said, let's talk about video because a lot of you guys, especially intermediate photographers or content creators, you're also gonna wanna shoot video with your camera. And this camera, I have an argument for you, hear me out. Keep an open mind. In 2021, this camera is a really good video camera in 1080p. In 4K, it crops at 1.4 times crop. You lose the dual pixel autofocus and it just has a lot of issues, a lot of grain. It doesn't do well overall in 4K. All right, so this is the video on the Canon EOS RP. How do we think it looks? Now, yes, it is in 1080p. I am shooting at 30 frames per second right now. Same Godox lighting setup, same mic setup, same background light. So really nothing new for my studio setup. I am shooting on a 50mm and I'm opened all the way up, testing out the eye tracking and face detect autofocus. So far from what it looks like it's doing a pretty decent job. The dual pixel autofocus for Canon is pretty good. Now, of course, this Canon kind of falls apart in 4K. So that's really the big downfall of this camera, but I'm still not opposed to shooting 1080p video, especially for YouTube and online content creation. I think 1080p is still very much usable, and I think the value for this EOS RP is undenied at the price point that we're finding it today. So what do you guys think? Tell me what you think of the quality of this video. Let's get back. This is not a tool to shoot 4K video. If you are a YouTuber and you are strictly shooting 4K, this isn't the camera for you, just look elsewhere. If you're willing to accept those limitations and still shoot in 1080p, which I think you should, and here's my argument for it, I'm gonna keep it brief. I would much rather have a full frame camera with good low light capabilities, good autofocus like this has, no crop, good colors, where I can shoot things with built-in mic and headphone jacks and a fully articulating screen and shoot in 1080p than I would having a camera that can shoot 4K and just not have all those things. Typically, I'm gonna pair this against like an A6400. An A6400 is kind of in that same price point right now, even on the used market. An A6400, yes, it can shoot 4K, but it doesn't have a fully articulating screen. It has rolling shutter issues. It doesn't have this good dynamic range, and it doesn't have as good colors, doesn't have a headphone jack. Whereas this has all of those things and it's in full frame. So if you want that full frame look and you're willing to shoot in 1080, which I think you should, because also where are you putting out your content? If you're putting it out on YouTube, hey, your 4K details are getting crushed down and compressed anyway. Are you delivering on Vimeo in full 4K in full bit rate to your clients? Probably not. You're probably a content creator or getting into the game and learning video and shooting on social medias and YouTube and whatnot. So be open to shooting in 1080. I think in 1080p, this is still a fantastic tool that can tell a good story and put your art out there. In conclusion, and this is my big talking point and really the main reason I'm making this video, in 2021, is the Canon EOS RP a good option? And I think it's an outstanding option, and for the price at, let's say, $800, everyone should look at it and consider it, because here it is. The Canon EOS RP really was mainly poo-pooed when it came out for a couple big reasons. One, the 4K sucked. No IBIS, no weather sealing, one card slot. So all those things were kind of off-putting for the professional shooter. But I'm not talking about the professional shooter now. I'm talking about the intermediate or the online content creator, or really the value hunter, someone that may have professional skills but doesn't have that money to drop on, a really high-end camera. And that's where this camera is for you. First of all, when it came out, the Canon EOS RF line of lenses were really expensive and they weren't really vast. So the question was, why would you buy a Canon EOS RP, a cheaper full frame camera, and then still have to shell out, twice the cost of the body for one RF lens? So not a lot of people found that to be valuable, so they kind of passed on it. The value hunters just didn't look at it as an option. But now in 2021, that's no longer the case. The Canon EOS RF line is vast. It's actually growing quickly. It's picked up a ton of third-party attention, and you're now starting to see RF lenses on the used market. I saw a lot of them. In fact, I picked up the 50mm 1.8 lens for like $170, $180. It's $200 brand new. But that lens is a great example of now you have cheaper lens options that are native to the RF line. Additionally, I haven't tested this out myself, but I've read that with an adapter, actually this camera does really well with older Canon lenses, the ones that are not made natively for the mirrorless body. So now you have a whole plethora of cheap lens options that you could pair with this body. And for under $1,000, hell, under $1,000, I got this thing for $800, then paired it with a $170 fantastic Nifty 50. If you want to see the review for that one, I put it here. And it's a great little package. Small, lightweight, can get professional photography. I can do baby photography, headshot. I could shoot weddings with this thing, although I'm a little nervous shooting weddings with one card slot. But hell, if I'm open to shooting that and feeling gutsy, I could shoot a full wedding with this. You could get into wedding photography with this camera. It's a fantastic little option. So I say in 2021, the Canon EOS RP is the best option for sub $1,000 full frame on the market right now. What do you guys think? Do you want to fight me here? Do you have other options? What would you guys rather have? Let me know in the comments below what you think is a better value. I argue if you want that full frame look, hell, this is the camera to look at. That's another thing to talk about is the Canon mirrorless lineup now is really growing. Now with the R5, R6, R3, you have a lot of options to step up to. So this is a really good entry point into building out that glass. And then when you outgrow this camera, you can now cheaply and easily sell this off, probably for like $500. You'll lose like $200 in this in a couple years, and then move up to now a used R5 or used R6. That's where the smart value buyer, I think this is a really good play. That's all I got for this video. I hope I brought you some value and you enjoyed it. If you did, hit me with a thumbs up. Even if you like or disagree with me, hit me with a thumbs up if this was at least entertaining to listen to. Sub for more awesome videos. I hope you join my team. I'll see you guys in future videos. Peace.